Please welcome Dr. Leyla Acaroglu.
So I am a designer and a sociologist. I'm very passionate about the way we can use design to influence social and environmental change, right? I actually started off as an industrial designer because I wanted to solve the problem of toothbrushes and remote controls and how they don't work in the world. And so I ended up uncovering the fact that most of the things that we have in our lives are designed without much consideration for us as the user and for the whole wide world, basically, the environmental impacts, the people who produced it. So someone name the most infuriating product you've ever interacted with. Well, I don't suggest that interacting with battery acid is such a good idea. But nonetheless, batteries, it's so annoying when they break. You don't have a way to fix it. Well, my work is really about trying to figure out how we can re-interact with our everyday products in a different way. So I was actually named Champion of the Earth by the United Nations a couple years ago, which is an actual thing I didn't know about either until they called me and they were like, "Hi, Leyla. Would you like a cape?" Which that never came, actually. The cape never came. I'm very disappointed. But this is really amazing because I am really passionate about the material world, and I'm a nerd. And somehow I end up getting named Champion of the Earth along with Afro Shea, who did the world's biggest beach cleanup in Mumbai, which I'm sure many of you have seen on social media and is extremely inspiring. But the thing is that what I really want to do is I want to enlighten your lives through understanding the way your everyday products actually have a life. Like the chair you're sitting on, it has a story to tell you, not just about what it feels like to be sat on, but it actually can tell you about where its materials were mined, the processes that went into developing all of the components, and ultimately what kind of end-of-life impact it's going to have when it's no longer needed as a chair. And the everyday world that we live in has heaps of impacts, right? I'm really passionate about sustainability. I literally live and breathe this. I was super excited to be invited to the Montreal Protocol's 30th anniversary. Who is old enough in the room to know what the Montreal Protocol is? Great. For the rest of you, it's essentially the world's most successful environmental initiative. 192 countries signed up to help solve the problem of CFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, being admitted into the atmosphere, thus creating a giant hole, and we were all going to burn to death. Thankfully, we didn't burn to death, which is very great. And I'm from Australia, where the hole is quite big, so I'm still alive to tell the story. And this is really inspiring to me because at this stage in my career, looking at how successful we were at that, it gives me inspiration for the possibility of the future, right? So let's just all turn our minds to what you think the future is going to hold. A lot of people, if I ask you, like, what do you think the future is going to be like? People are like, robots and AI and maybe destruction from climate change. If you sound like that, I'm sorry. But ultimately, I mean, some people have a positive perspective of the future, and that's great, and I personally do, but there are days, you know, where you're like, we're stuffed. And that's really unfortunate, because if we all perpetuate that idea, I'm pretty sure that's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's look at design and the role that it plays in our lives, because I can hopefully convince you that design literally is the most powerful force that humans have created. We design the entire world to meet our needs. If you think about it, from the moment you were born, unless you were born on a forest floor and stayed there for the rest of your life, nearly every single second of your day is influenced by the design world. From the things you wear on your body, through to the spaces you move through, the bed you sleep in, the technology that you're addicted to, delightful technology. This is influencing not only your body, but also your mind, and also your values and perspectives and your identity and everything. Design is one of the most important and influential aspects of the human world. In fact, I always say we design the world and the world designs us. We're in this dynamic relationship. And I'm not just talking about really crazy people who do things that they should do, like him, but I'm still shocked. Ultimately, I'm talking about like us as citizen designers. Because yes, I'm an industrial designer and I know how to use CAD and figure out how to design a toothbrush that doesn't suck. But ultimately, every single person in this room, in fact, every single person on this planet, no matter what their socioeconomic status is an investor in the future through the actions they take today. So design is this incredibly important social influencer. It's not just the material world, it's also the cultural conditions that we reinforce through the choices we make. And design as a concept is also a system, right? We've constructed this system of design. and we've made it work for us. Humans are amazing at finding things and making them work for our own benefit. And so this world of design and the impacts of design are constantly interacting with us, and they're making things better or worse. And when we talk about ocean plastic waste, that is the product of design. It's not that someone sat there and evilly conspired to destroy, hopefully. I hope that wasn't the case. But let's just say that that didn't happen. There was like this series of actions and events that ultimately came together to this point in time where we have a global tragedy in our oceans that we are all equally responsible for. And how this came to be is that humans create linear systems. We live in a very beautifully constructed linear economy. That means that we take resources out of the ground or shear them off a sheep's back or cut them from a tree. We take things from nature, we transform them in our incredible industrial systems into usable goods, and then we use up those goods, and then we throw them in a hole in the ground, or sometimes they leak into nature, or sometimes we burn them. That's pretty much the system that we have all grown up in, that we are all replicating, and that all seems quite normal to us. But this is not normal, nor is it an ancient tradition of humanity. Okay, well, maybe actually. Humans have been throwing things out for quite some time. However, they used to be quite benign because they were made of organic materials. Otherwise, archaeologists would have nothing to do, I would say. But this is the history of landfill sites, of waste dumps in the US. If you look at it, this is literally in the last 60 years have we evolved from this state of not needing to find places to store the stuff we don't need, like kids who hide all their trash under the bed when the parents say to clean their room. We've literally done that as a species. We're like, don't worry about this, guys, it's fine. We'll just deal with that later. And this linear system of taking things out of the ground, processing them into usable goods, and wasting them is wasteful. It's really inefficient as well, and it also has all of these externalities. Externalities, if you didn't study economics, is essentially the idea of that we have created a frame that we look at things through, and the economy, based on GDP, states that only things that have been produced already in the economy within a given border is valuable to assess the economic potential of it. Whereas human labor that's outside of that, like motherhood or caring for friends or family who are sick or cooking food for your neighbor that doesn't pay for it, none of those things are seen as valuable in our current economic structure, nor are the services that nature provides to us for free. Nor is that ecosystem that provided the clean water or the tree that we need. So all of this externalization of the impacts means it makes it very easy for us to continue on the linear system of ignoring the impacts that our actions have on the planet. The thing is not one single person in this room, nor on the planet, as it turns out, can survive without nature. We are literally made of the same stuff as nature. In fact, we put nature in our bodies every day, actually every second, when we breathe and when we eat. We are in an interconnected, interdependent relationship with this planet. And yet we have somehow managed to avoid the responsibility of conserving those resources for us and for future generations. And so sustainability is not about just figuring out how to solve one problem. It's about reimagining what it means to be a human. Because if you take nature away, you're screwed. Sorry, I hate to break it to you. I'm Australian, we swear a lot. I'll just keep it PG because we're on the lives. But this is the thing, like we really, really forget this. And you don't go to school and someone's like, oh, by the way, you're in an interconnected relationship with phytoplankton in the ocean. If you did get that at school, good school. But most of us, we live our lives completely disconnected from the natural environment, forgetting that without it, we're completely screwed. So the proposition to solve this linear economy is the circular economy, which we heard a little bit about this morning. And many of you are probably familiar with the waste hierarchy of the reduce, reuse, recycle, and these are all great strategies. These are great actions, but they're very much at the end of pipe, right? So they're very much like, well, we created a problem, now we should try and fix it, rather than like, let's reimagine the problem to begin with. What is the problem of waste, of plastic waste in the oceans? What is that problem? The problem is that we have created a system of disposability. We have created a system where things are literally valueless. They have a single purpose, they're used up, and then they're no longer valued. And when they're no longer valued, nobody takes responsibility for them. So the circular economy as a concept, as a business strategy, essentially says, well, like, okay, how do we revalue things right from the get-go? Like, what are we actually trying to achieve when we create technological devices or packaging to transport liquid? Because ultimately, if you're in the beverage industry, you don't sell liquid, you sell the ability to transport liquid. And so reimagining the functionality of what we're trying to deliver to the market, to the economy, and the human need that is then becoming a customer of that, that's really how we revolutionize the way we do things and how we design out the problems from the start. And we can also look at nature, which turns out did a pretty good job of solving this problem well before we came along, because nature as an entire system is regenerative. There is no such thing as waste in nature. No such thing. In fact, something that dies is intentionally a nutrient for another part of the system. If a tree drops all of its leaves, it looks like it's gone to sleep, but actually it's just having a little drink. That was going to be the worst analogy. I'll say it anyway. If a tree drops all of its leaves, it basically, because they drop them at the right time of year, where they get all mushy from the rain, and then the microorganisms in the soil will essentially eat that up, create a food source for the tree, so the tree can create tiny little blossoms, so come spring, it's just life, right? It is literally magic if you spend enough time staring at trees. Did you know that trees speak to each other through mycelium? Mycelium is a neural network. It's mushrooms. They speak to each other. Scientifically proven now, not just my mother saying that to me. Actually, they have the ability to share resources as well. If one tree in an ecosystem is sick, another tree, the granddad tree, will be like, well, son, here, take the car, and send it some nutrients to support it. It's incredible how nature solves problems, and yet we don't look to this incredible resource. We look to the industrial system and we say, well, we can just efficientize it better. I'm a really big fan of systems thinking, and there's this guy, Russell Arkoff, long dead now, was big in the 90s, got some great videos on the internet, and he said, there's no point doing, I have to get this the right way around, there's no point doing the wrong thing right. You have to do the right thing wrong to get to the right outcome. And that's what's beautiful about the story we just heard, is that challenging the status quo, being different, being willing to fail, being okay with risk. These things create the outcomes that are going to leapfrog some of the problems that we face. Because as I said, anyone can opt out of being a human. No one can opt out of breathing. You could try. Pretty sure you're not going to have a good outcome, although it's actually physiologically impossible to kill yourself by self-suffocation, just so you know. The brain automatically will start breathing, so it's safe to try at home. Just don't sue me if something goes wrong with your brain, okay? Alrighty, so basically we all have to breathe. Air pollution right now is killing 9 billion people every year. A couple years ago it was only 8 billion. It's insane how quickly we have created more problems for ourselves. And this is the system that we live in. We live in a system, it's called planet Earth. There's only one of them in the whole of the universe as far as we know to date, and maybe in the future we'll discover others, but right now this is the only one that has life, and we are part of that system, yet somehow we manage to keep messing it up and not being at the forefront of not prioritizing how we can be the first generation of humans to solve the problems that we created. Thanks. So this is the challenge. How do we move from the linear economy to the circular economy, right? Well, I'm a designer. I love challenges. Basically, you go to design school, you learn, oh, there's a problem. Let's break it and fix it again. It's really fun. And this kind of mentality, I think it's become very popular with design thinking. People love playing with Post-it notes now. But ultimately, you get this excitement, this dopamine hit from figuring out how to solve a problem. And this is really the issue that the circular economy is presenting to business leaders, is presenting to governments at all levels, and individuals. You can solve the problem for your own life, but you can also go to your office tomorrow and be like, okay, people, here's the challenge. What are we doing? How are we understanding our supply chain? How are we understanding the way the material flows of our impact as an industry or as a provider of services? It doesn't even have to be that you are literally digging stuff out of the ground and turning it into usable goods. A lot of service providers have huge impacts through the paper that they buy or through the kinds of services that they're providing to their community. So understanding where you're at to begin with, and then looking at the possibilities of circularizing. And you don't have to just believe me that circularity is becoming the mega trend. IKEA just recently said, those of you who don't know what IKEA is, we can talk later. It's a pretty phenomenal brand, and they recently just said 2030 carbon neutral and completely circular in our entire supply chain. This is pretty epic given how much influence they have on the supply chain. Lego, everybody loves Lego. Lego are going petroleum free on all of their little adorable, colorful bricks. I mean, there's countless companies, and we have 2 years ago, the United Nations announced the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 global goals for us to figure out how, by 2030, to get humanity from the current status quo to a place where we live in an equitable, sustainable, and hopefully regenerative world. So there's a lot going on. But waste, the thing we're here to talk about, the thing that many of you guys work within, let's just look at it a little bit more through the microscope. Waste is a design flaw. It's a problem that someone created. Collectively, we all reinforce it. But ultimately, waste is a reinforcing system where we create something, whether we intended to or not, there's a loss from that system, whether it be the byproduct of the production or whether it be the plastic cup. That ends up having to find somewhere to go, so we create recycling or we create waste management, which then makes it viable for us to continue doing the problem over and over again. And so we live in this system of reinforcing the problem rather than finding a completely new solution. And waste is literally translated as a loss. We lose things constantly from the system. It's devaluing. We design consumer goods to be immediately devalued. The whole concept of a single-use product, of a disposable product, is that it will have the minimal amount of functional value you can possibly attribute to it. It's really crazy. If you look at it from the sociological brain that I have, it's really crazy. It's kind of cool on one hand too. Humans, we do some really strange things, but it's ultimately this huge challenge that we have to solve. And from a social perspective, what it teaches us is that we have all accidentally participated in the normalization of a waste-based culture. It is normal now to fill a receptacle with stuff and take it out onto your street and put it there. You know, I was just recently in Southeast Asia, and we were in a community where burning of trash is still very common, right? Because there isn't a system to select it. And like the smell of dioxin is quite asphyxiating, I must say, if you're not used to it. And the normal situation, this was very normal. And it reminded me of when I was a kid, this was what they used to do to get rid of trash. I'm old enough for this still to be a thing that they did in Australia, you know, in the country as well. And like, I would say there's probably still some places in the US that this happens, but it's no longer a normal practice, right? You have like advanced waste management services to make sure that no one is burning their plastic in their backyard and causing all sorts of emissions. You know, but this is the reality of where we're at. We have still got this exponentially growing waste conundrum that we need to solve. And the planet has biophysical realities, like there's only so much space we can find. And we got a lot of space in Australia, I gotta say. It's a big country, not that many people, but it's a beautiful place. And nobody really wants trash heaps in their backyard. So this is a problem that we need to figure out how to iterate and iterate on quickly. So again, we are looking at a massive problem, and this problem was yesterday's solution. So how are we gonna be a part of it being not tomorrow's problem? Right? The more we continue to perpetuate the same system, the more we end up with the same problems. And everything we do has an impact. You know, the statistic, whether or not it's fully scientifically validated, as was put earlier, it was in The Guardian, so I don't know. But essentially, apparently, we use 1 million water bottles every single minute. Every single minute, 1 million water bottles. That's crazy, right? Like, and they're so ubiquitous now. But you know, this was not around like 10 years ago. 10 years ago, water bottles were nowhere near as pervasive as they are today. And we just keep using them, it keeps increasing it. We're in this cycle of continuing to create problems. And we talked a lot about ocean plastic waste this morning. And I want to bring this home to you. So we think about this like big garbage patch in the middle of the ocean, and some of us go to beaches and we see all the plastic showing up, and it has a visceral and emotional reaction, right? I doubt there's anyone in the room who's all like, I love going to watch ocean plastic waste show up on the beach. So beautiful, the way it just goes like this. No, most of us feel pretty crap about it. And the thing is that large pieces of ocean plastic waste are one problem. What's the other big problem with plastic in the ocean? Microplastics. What do they come from? Yes. One of the main sources is your clothing shedding tiny little microfibers. The other one is from body products. Like, they've pretty much got rid of that now, but someone had the great idea to put microplastic beads in body exfoliators, which goes straight down the drain. But the main contributor to microplastics in the ocean was surprising to me, and I bet it'll surprise you, car tires. Think about it. They go bald. Where do those little bits of plastic go? And all roads lead to the ocean. So here we have all of these amazing industrial systems that we all participate in, that we all benefit from, and how does that impact us on an individual level? Well, I think it was mentioned, but let me just drive this home. Recent studies have shown that nearly all table salts have microplastics in them. And a very small but nonetheless fascinating study done showed of the 8 participants analyzed, everybody had it in their poop. So we live on a closed system. You and I are a system. Everything just stays on the system, right? It just cycles through. So we need to change the way we imagine the flows of things, because they're going to come back and bite us in the poop eventually. So really what this shows us is this ignorance of the systems that we're living in, the systems that we participate in, and the influx that they have on us. We live on this planet, like I said, everything's interconnected, and this emotional reaction is actually creating really significant change. There are plastic bans all over the world. My favorite is in Kenya, where if you get caught with a plastic bag, it's a $38,000 fine. Seriously, they were like, no bags. It's like, how you come up with 38 specifically, I don't know. But Europe just bans 10 everyday disposable items. In fact, if you go online, you'll see like hundreds of cities and towns and local communities that it's not just bags, it's actually more to do with disposability at large. All of the disposable cutlery and packaging, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous now when it never used to be. But this isn't just a trend that governments are supporting. This is like a lifestyle Instagram trend. Go and look up who is participating in the zero waste life. There are thousands of people who are actively rejecting single-use products, and they're changing their lifestyles in order to be able to have a stronger ownership of the impact that they have. And there are heaps of simple things you can do. It's not just banning a bag. There are many that you can actually take on in your day-to-day life. And the cool thing about that is every individual action speaks volumes to the people around you, but also it speaks volumes to society in general. So we're challenging the status quo through everyday actions as well as the bigger political systems. So how do you actually implement the circular economy? First of all, circularity is about internalizing those externalities. So you have to understand where things are leaking from your system to begin with, to do an audit or an assessment to understand where the problems are occurring. And you have to be willing to own the impacts of your supply chain, which is actually quite confronting for a lot of organizations who have avoided this for a long time. To actually look at the impacts, not just the sustainability impacts of the environment, but also on the social impacts, it can be quite confronting. So being willing to own it and then being willing to make change. The best tool to do this is a life cycle approach. If you're not familiar with life cycle assessment, it's a scientific process of understanding the whole of life environmental impact of a product, service, or system. And it has a kind of body of practitioners. It has an ISO standard. It's an incredible tool that I strongly recommend if you're in the supply chain, if you produce material goods, that you have LCAs done. But there's also the tool of life cycle thinking, which is the more kind of conceptual framework that you can apply to decision making, which goes like this. Everything that you see around you has a story. Everything's been produced in some way. So in order to produce things, we have to extract raw materials out of the ground, manufacture them, right? We have to package and transport them and send them all over the globe. Then we have to use them, and then we have the end of life. So let me ask you a quick question. Biggest environmental impact of a pair of jeans, if you had to pick one of these, which one is it? Can you yell louder? One? No, it's not one. It's not 3. 4. It's 4. It's the use phase. Why? Because you got to wash them. So we call that an active product. A product that has an active input in its life stage often has its dominant impact in that stage. So there are these like archetypes or rules of thumb that can apply to different products based on the way in which they interact with the system. So first of all, life cycle thinking, a systems mindset, understanding the way things flow, how you're, as a business or as an individual, are influencing that. There's a lot of documentation now on the circular economy and how to apply it. But the most interesting thing that I find in my work in helping to kind of like make this change happen is how little people actually understand how big an impact that they have, one person has on the planet through their choices. Let's just take food, for example. I would say most people in this room have engaged with this product at some point in the last few hours. And food, great thing, obviously, keeps us alive. 40%, you've probably heard this, of the world's food that is produced is wasted either at the point of agriculture or the point of home. Like a large percentage in the US is actually from the home. I personally blame it on the refrigerator because they're too big, things get lost in the back, and more importantly, that so-called crisper drawer, it's the soggy drawer. Nothing stays crisp in there. The simple hack for that, if you want a simple hack, get a Tupperware container or a non-branded reusable container that you can lock because it creates a little air seal so your lettuces will stay really happy for a long time. Go home, try it, tweet me about it, changes your life, trust me. Really. You'll be like, my broccoli, it's still fresh. So ultimately, there are multiple points in the supply chain and multiple reasons why food waste occurs, but it's a travesty because ultimately we are not only losing the potential to feed people, but we're also losing all of those embodied environmental impacts in the phosphorus and the pesticides and the water and the petroleum for the tractors and everything else. That's what a life cycle perspective gives you, this like, oh, much bigger than just the small piece of the pie that I'm engaging with. You know, the climate impact of agriculture, it's 20% of our global carbon emissions are attributed to agricultural production. So it's not just that you waste food, it's that we've kind of increased the demand for more food to be produced. So we live in this complex system with complex varying impacts. Here's a really useful tool if you've never engaged with the ecological footprint methodology. I highly recommend looking it up, perhaps doing it yourself. It gives you an idea of how many resources are required. If everyone in the world lived like you, the average American is like well over 6 planets would be required. Globally, around August every year, we hit this thing called Earth Overshoot Day. It's literally the day that we use up all of our allocated resources for the year. And we start going into using next year's resources. And if you think about it, if we keep doing that, soon it'll be your kids' resources and their kids' resources. The thing is when you look at sustainability from this perspective, it takes away some of the inconsistencies and it gives you this framework of understanding there are limits and constraints, and the world is made up of systems of which you participate in and you have choices to make more informed or better decisions. But a lot of people get this information and then they're like, oh my God, this is such a big problem. How do I climb the bridge between these two big chasms of problems? And I think that the big issue here is that the only way you can make change is if you start making change, because then you get a positive feedback loop and start to see that the fear and the personal kind of like moment that you have is actually just totally in your mind. See, the thing about humans is we're very complicated. That's the one thing I learned from being a sociologist. And the human mind is extremely interesting. And despite us all being unique individuals, we all share two very common things. The first being that we have neurochemicals that influence our decisions, and the second that we have cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are these mistakes in reasoning, and they're universal. And there are hundreds of them. Really quickly, stuff like confirmation bias. When you're Googling, you will avoid things that don't reinforce what you already believe. And what happens is that we do that in conversations and in the businesses. So the brain edits out things that don't make it easy for you to go about your life. We have a status quo bias. Most people don't like to look different or behave different. They don't like to be shamed. So they make sure that they fit in with the status quo. And these are all happening subconsciously, right? 80%, up to 80% of our cognitive processing happens in the deep central part of our brain, the emotional cortex. And we have this huge problem right now called negativity bias. Go on any social media, and unless you've curated it to be happy things and puppies, you will be pretty upset about the state of the world, right? And the negativity bias means that the human mind places more weight on a negative experience than a positive one. If you lose $100 right now, it'll last a lot longer than if you find $100. So we have this problem where we get so fixated on the issues, we don't give ourselves the space to solve the problem. And loss aversion, right? Like if you have invested time and energy in something and then discover it doesn't work, people are like so invested, they've sunk their cost in it that they're not willing to lose it. So they just keep doing the same stupid thing over and over again. It's like relationships. Get out of the relationship that's not working. So these are all these like amazing little like shared problems that we have that allow us to really start to look back at the bigger picture here and say, okay, humanity has an imperative to solve environmental problems for our own benefit, otherwise don't have kids, really, because otherwise what's the point? We have this opportunity, we have the knowledge and the technology, we have the economic capabilities, but we don't have people who are willing to step outside of their comfort zone and to overcome their own biases and to embrace the fear of failure to figure out how we can move into the future in a better way than we started today. And this is one of my main points. The problem with the systems that we've set up is they reinforce the problem. Recycling is brilliant, but it has reinforced disposability. This is a recent study from Georgia University. It's very hard to see, but essentially in 1996, just 20 years ago, there was not much of a recycling market. In the last 20 years, a lot of it's been exported. We heard about the ban in China. The shifting of the burden made it easier for us to just ignore the problem for a longer period of time. And now we're really starting to see the issues very, very viscerally. And this is really the challenge that we have. How do we design a future that doesn't have disposability? That gives us the things that we need and that we want to have healthy, happy, and prosperous lives, but in a post-disposable way. What does a future without disposability look like? And there's 7.4 billion of us on this planet right now. And so that's maybe not quite 7.4 billion, but at least half of them of people's brains who can help solve these problems. So we have this opportunity to overcome the normalization, which is what's happened, the normalization of the coffee cup in the morning and the disposable cup in the bag, but not only that, the normalization of fast fashion, of having a new thing that you can't re-wear because you already posted on Instagram. That's just stupid. Seriously. I just wear the same thing over and over again. Literally, I have repaired my t-shirt. No one knows except for all of you on the internet now, so there goes that. I actually have this thing called a capsule wardrobe. Like, that's what it is. It's like where you go, you know what, I don't want everything else. I just want the simples that look good, make it easy. I have way more time in the morning to like search Instagram than actually make decisions about what I'm going to wear. So we can overcome this kind of normalization of convenience and comfort, and we can be at the forefront of redesigning the systems that sustain the problem. Because we got ourselves into this mess, and only in the last couple generations, and we can get ourselves out. And that's the thing. If you become a problem lover, which is what I'm proposing to you now, rather than a problem avoider, you could start by going on a date with your problems. Really helps. Have a glass of wine, find out what makes them tick. Be willing to hear the stories. Be willing to be part of the story, part of the solution that doesn't involve some useful thing being buried in a hole in the ground when it could have been put back into use. It could have gone back into the system, into the cycle. And that's what the circular design movement is all about, is redesigning our products, our services, and our systems with things like repair, but right from the beginning. How things can go back into an industrial symbiotic cycle. How we can have really healthy reselling markets. There are so many of these apps now that make it possible for people to not just have old sweatshirts sitting in, well, old sweatshirts you probably don't, it's a bit gross. So now that I think about it, the whole term sweatshirt, like, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. There are lots of these strategies that you can bring into your business decision as well as your day-to-day life decision, because we are all citizen designers of the future. And I know it's like super cliche to have an Einstein quote, but this is a really good one. That ultimately we can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them. So first and foremost, we have to challenge the status quo of our own problem solving. And we can all contribute to the future. And yes, it takes every agent and actor, but none of us can ignore the fact that we live in magic and that we are responsible for making sure that everybody else gets to enjoy the magic that we have today. So thank you.